Hello, so today we're going to be talking about 5 costs. Something that I mention a lot in my videos is how 5 costs are really good at capping a board, and this is like your highest potential is usually to play around these higher cost units, and how upgrading them can be very powerful for pretty much any board that you play. I understand though that that's a little bit confusing and difficult sometimes, especially if you're not really comfortable around flexibly slotting in different units to your board. So what I want to do is I want to introduce all of the 5 costs, which I'm sure all of you know how they kind of function, but I'm also going to explain like some of the general game plan you would want to have around them, as well as items that work really well with these units in order to give you a better understanding of what each unit wants in order to get the fullest out of these units. So you see it in a shop, you can slot it in and get a lot more oomph to your board. Before we get into it though, please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out as a small TFT content creator. Additionally, I do guides every single day, so if you're looking for getting better at TFT set 14 and you just want to see a guide every day, this is a good channel for you. Starting this week, I believe, I should be doing general game plan guides, so stuff like how to play reroll, how to play 4 costs, how to econ manage, things like that. So especially if you're a beginner player, look forward to those starting this week. So I do one of those every single set, so this is going to be the set 14 version of those guides. Now, we're going to go through the 5 costs. I'm going to go through them in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with Aurora, and I'm going to introduce the unit. I'm going to talk about some itemizations. I'm going to talk about some general game plan like trait activations and how you can get the most out of them. So let's start with Aurora. Aurora, if you don't know, her main gimmick is that she takes a unit on the bench and she swaps places with it, which makes her untargetable because now she'll be on your bench, and whatever unit was on the bench, here in this case I'll just put this Nidalee, she'll swap with the unit, and then she'll be on bench, she'll be untargetable, and the unit will then be replaced, and the unit will get like a small buff. I think it's usually like an attack speed buff based on AP. But either way, the idea with Aurora a lot of the times is that you want to usually swap with a very high value unit for the same reason that I'm making this guide talking about 5 costs and all of that. You don't necessarily want to play a unit that you want to benefit from different synergies on your board. It's usually a unit that can easily slot in that either does a lot of damage, has a lot of front line, or does a combination of both. So in most cases, it's going to be one of the tanky or frontline units. For example, Kabuko, Zac work really well. Zac, he'll actually benefit from getting the extra blobs. So a lot of times you will roll with Zac on your board, gather as many blobs as possible, and then have him on bench so that Aurora can swap with him, and then basically just put in this giga strong tank unit that can take her place and help out your board while she continues to do damage. Kabuko works in a similar way. Kabuko, the main reason you play him is because he has a really powerful stun. So not necessarily you're playing him because you want him to do like a bunch of damage, but more so like if you can just get him in and he does the stun, that's a really big value and it can often sway a fight pretty convincingly. Besides these 2 units, one of the main units that you usually like to have is Urgot. Viego also works, but Viego, it's usually just because Viego is really strong. He's not like super, like he doesn't bring the extra target dude in, so if possible you would want to have Viego on your board so you can benefit from Viego's passive or whatever. Not passive, but his extra soul killer ability where he gets the extra unit on board. Urgot works really well with Aurora, not for being an extra frontline unit, but Urgot basically just has an execute. So if you have an Urgot, and especially if you're high rolling, you have items for the Urgot, then the Aurora can swap in, the Urgot will come in, and the Urgot can do a lot of damage and give your board an execute ability where he'll just be killing units for you and potentially even cashing out those things into some extra gold or extra components. So it's actually very high value. Now, in terms of items for Aurora, a lot of times if you're playing around a board with Aurora, you usually have Dynamo in. If you have Dynamo active, then you can often forego mana generation items, and you can basically just put full damage items on her. Something that's really important to understand, however, is that Aurora does a really good AoE attack, and it usually hits a lot of the board, if not all of the board, and majority of the time the backline units as well. So she's really good at spreading anti-heal effects, and that can be very powerful and very potent. So often if you're trying to play around Aurora, or if you see a random Aurora, putting anti-heal items on her, either red buff or Morello, sorry, I said that backwards, Morello or red buff, works really well because she'll apply it very effectively to the backline. That can sway a fight very convincingly and very powerfully. Additionally, because she hops on the bench, she actually takes herself away from the fight for a long period of time. So a lot of times Aurora is either the last unit alive, or she just like stays alive for a very long period of time. Because of that, she's actually a really good holder of Archangels. A lot of times Archangels is really risky because it needs time to ramp up and stuff like that, but Aurora, she's going to be off the board for a while, so she actually can ramp up Archangels really effectively. So Archangel actually works really nicely. If you're looking for like a 3 items just building off of components, a lot of times something like max damage can work with a Jewel Gauntlet and an Archangels. And then, you know, if you already have Dynamo in, you can put a Morello. If you need to make mana generation items, Shojin can work well on her if you have an extra Shojin. And it's good for item economy. But also an item that works really well on her additionally is also Adaptive Helm. Adaptive Helm actually times itself in its mana generation pretty much on par with Dynamo, so it has really good synergy, and it's also a little bit better because it gives a little bit more stats. It gives a little bit of extra AP, so it makes the Aurora have more of a one-shot potential and doing a little bit more damage compared to Shojin. But typically, you're trying to go for big damage items, and if you don't have big damage items and you just find a random Aurora, then you can make really good use of her by just giving her anti-heal. That's usually the game plan that you have. Now let's go to our next unit, Garen. So Garen is one of those units that you almost always want to play. God of the Net is extremely powerful. Basically, after a certain number of player combats, you will then be able to put like this extra synergy on a unit on your board. Now, the extra synergy doesn't add to the synergy that you have. So, for example, if you're playing 5 Streak Demon and you get a Streak Demon from God of the Net, it's not going to make you play 6 Streak Demon. It's just going to be that whatever unit you put it on is going to benefit from Streak Demon. So it's extremely powerful. I said Streak Demon as an example, but it's extremely powerful when you're playing deep vertical lines, stuff like Streak Demon or Anima Squad. These are lines that you're typically playing like 7 Streak Demon or like, you know, 7 Anima Squad. If you're playing deep into a vertical trait, Garen can help you to cap out your board really high because he will basically just give it that synergy to other units on your board. If you're playing a lot of frontline, for example, Garen's good because then he can benefit from the frontline synergy. If you're playing like Divinicorp, then he can benefit from getting a lot of stats. A lot of times Garen helps any board cap really high because you're basically just giving extra synergies to your board, which is extremely powerful and extremely potent. Now, in terms of Garen items himself, Garen could work as a tank, but he's typically better off being a melee style attacker. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you're making your Giga Frontline Omnivamp AD items. So often BT Sterex, like big AD items, are really good. He does have AP scaling and getting an extra shield, but so much of his damage has really high physical scaling, and he also hits multiple enemies. So a lot of times, like Sterex, just to give him a large amount of survivability, is extremely powerful, and it also gives him a lot of AD. And stuff like Bloodthirster is really good. You can also just go for survivability items like Edge of Night. There's also some other survivability items like Titans and whatnot. But a lot of times, a good thing to do is just to build him for like really big damage, because he should be pretty tanky in his own right, and he has good like survivability with his kit, with his shielding already. Giant Slayer for damage amp is really good. And it's really good in the current meta because there's a lot of rerollers and a lot of comps with a lot of HP like Exotech, so Giant Slayer is almost always active, which is really nice. But you can also build him with like full crit, right? You can build him with like a Jewel Gauntlet, or sorry, a Hodge and a IE, right? Just like crit items that synergize with crit chance. But think of him more as a melee frontline with AD items. That would work out best for him typically. Kabuko. So Kabuko's a little bit harder to slot in on a board. So Kabuko's good to just get a general stun. A lot of times if you're playing Kabuko, it's usually for the Bruiser synergy. You can just fit in a Kabuko for 2 Bruiser, and that usually helps cap out your board. If you do not have Cyberboss or Bruiser active, Kabuko is one of those units that's a little bit harder to make work on your board because he's probably just going to die too early. Comparatively to like some of the other 5 costs we were talking about that you can just throw in on any board, Kabuko, you usually want to have either one of these active, which usually means you're playing towards those lines. Bruiser is one that you can usually just slot in for free, but Kabuko, a lot of times you just want him to survive at least till 1 cast to make sure that he does the big stun. He has really good scaling off HP as well as from AP, so a lot of times what you really want on him is a Crown Guard. Crown Guard is like a go-to item. If you see a Crown Guard Kabuko, you can't go wrong. It's a really good item on him. It works really well, synergizes really well with his kit. It gives him survivability, it gives him AP, it gives him everything that he kind of wants. Besides that, you're usually building him for big tank items. You can also build him to try and get him to cast multiple times by giving him some sort of tier-based frontline item. Something like a redemption is really good, gives durability, as well as gives him some extra survivability with the healing aspect of it, and it's a tier item, so it gives him starting mana, which can make him cast a bit earlier, which is what you really want from him to that's what you want him in the first place. You want him to cast to get the stun off. That's the main reason you're playing Kabuko. Additionally, you can just put general tank items on him. If you have a Kabuko 2 upgrade and you have Bruiser Synergy, even a Warmogs is good because it scales him really effectively because he has a lot of HP base because of the Bruiser trait. But additionally, like just armor and MR items can work out really nicely. Anything that just gives him survivability, that's usually what you're going for. You're not usually going for like damage. You could go for like maybe a little bit of damage if you have some like extra emblems or synergies, but typically it's just Crown Guard if you can choose. If not, as much tankiness as possible. Next is Renekton. So Renekton you can kind of slot in. He actually benefits from also having Bastion, which is really nice. But yeah, the Divinicore mod is pretty nice for Renekton because he gives attack speed. Attack speed is universally used by pretty much everybody. If you're an AP unit, an AD unit, a frontline unit, no matter who's doing damage, attack speed is usually one of those stats that's really powerful and really strong for basically anybody because it helps everybody out in doing damage. So his bonus is good, his buffs are good. He also has this built-in Overlord trait where he basically just gains a bunch of AD if you're already playing around an AD comp. And then the fact that he's Bastion, it's also really easy for him to apply the Bastion synergy to your whole board. So a lot of times if you can slot him in, but he's a little bit awkward because sometimes he just does nothing. If you want him to pop off and do a lot of damage, a lot of times QSS is like a go-to item. The reason is that basically the way his casts work is that he does like a first cast and a second cast, and he basically like enters this empowered state where then he's just attacking really fast. So you really just want him to have a lot of attack speed to attack a lot. Early on in the set, I don't think it's as good anymore, but early on in the set, everybody was building like Rage Blade as a high cap on him just because like attacking fast was like his whole thing of just pumping out damage. But I think QSS is just a better option, and I don't think it's worth it to like dedicate a Gwynsu to him in particular because it's a little bit awkward in terms of your itemizations with other units. But QSS works really well because it just gives a bunch of attack speed and anti-stun, so you basically just go nuts, attacking as much as possible. Besides that, you can build him for like pure damage. Like usually it's just frontline melee style items, so you can go for like full like crit, you can go for like a Sterix and a like a Bloodthirster, but a lot of times it's just QSS, like a Bloodthirster for survivability, and often you'll also see like an Edge of Night, because if he lives long enough, he can often like wrap a backline because he just runs around attacking really fast. He can actually like kill some units off pretty convincingly. Just be careful. Obviously, if you don't have QSS, you can just build them more like kind of like how I was talking with Garen, frontline melee attack style items. So anything that gives him survivability, Omnivamp, AD, those are all things that can work out really well on the Renekton. Some secret stuff, if you ever want to look at it, is Rapid Fire Emblem on him. If you make Rapid Fire Emblem, it makes him into a backline unit because it gives him extra range, so it's secretly really strong on him. Like obviously there's other synergies with other emblems a lot of the time, but like Rapid Fire Emblem, Gwynsu, or QSS, and you just turn him into a backline unit, he pumps out damage, and it's like really strong if you're ever in a spot like that. Next is Samira. Samira, I think out of all the 5 costs, is the one that is the hardest to just fit in if you're not already playing around a board that plays around her traits. Typically, Amp is really powerful with her. Obviously, Street Demon's going to be really powerful with her. But these aren't traits that are necessarily easy to come by. So, a lot of times, it's not like, you know, how I was talking about Renekton and Kabuko, where, you know, you want to maybe play Bastion or Bruiser, but those are like team-wide buffs. A lot of times, if you're playing an Amp board or playing a Street Demon board, you're playing those boards and you're already planning around finding a Samira. That's what I mean to say. If you're not playing these boards, it's a little bit harder, and often it's like a skip Samira angle. Which I'm not sure if that's 100% right all the time, but it is just like, you know, it happens. A lot of times with Samira, if you're making items for her, you just want her to do a lot of damage. So sometimes you try and think that maybe she needs survivability because she kind of dives into the backline. Unless the opponent team has like heavy burst damage, you don't really need survivability on her. You'd rather her just do as much damage as possible. So a lot of times it's like the guard breaker, Edge of Night build that I usually like to talk about, right? You get damage amp and crit chance, and then you have crit chance and ult critting, so it works out really nicely with her. If you don't have these type of items, usually you're just building her towards like an AD carry, as much damage amp and crit chance as possible. So like, you know, if you have a bunch of swords left over and you're playing around Street Demon AP, which is really common, then IE, Deathblade, stuff like that would work out really nicely. But like I said, it's a little bit hard to play her if you don't have amp Street Demon style board, so don't be too, like, you know, sad if like you see a Samira and you can't really play around her as easily. Urgot. So Urgot is kind of weird in that he's really good in certain spots. If you have the open space for an Urgot, Urgot is great. If you hit an Urgot early, Urgot is great. Why is that? Well, Urgot can actually farm you gold and components with his execute. He also adds execute to your board, so there's always like some value of usefulness with him. However, it's a little bit awkward to fit in because sometimes he just does nothing and he feels like a useless waste of space on your board. Of course, that's true, but if you have nobody else to put on your board, he's going to be better than just like a low cost unit that just gives like very vague synergies. He gives you value, especially if you find him early. You can actually scale getting a lot of components, and that will actually help you to cap out really high. The way you should think about it is that 3 components is the equivalent of a gold augment. If you farm a couple components with this Urgot, you're up an entire gold augment on the lobby. It can snowball and scale very strong and very effectively. Now, in terms of actual items on Urgot, I think the best way to build him is just for big damage. So a lot of times it's like just put like your extra items on him. If you can, build him towards like massive amounts of damage. Before, like really early on, like there's a little bit of like a trait synergy, or like a synergy where he like attacks really fast and like he fires these extra rockets and stuff. So a lot of times in the past, people would build like Gwinsu or QSS on him. I don't think these items are that great. I'm actually more inclined to just put a QSS on him just to give him attack speed and just synergize with some crit items. Obviously he's Executioner, so if you're playing around Executioners, then you don't need to build crit items and you're better off building damage amp items. But what I would suggest is not necessarily building like a Gwinsu or building a Runans. I would recommend building bow related items, so stuff like a Last Whisper if you don't have if you don't have Sundering already, or something like a Giant Slayer or a Guard Breaker. These are items that they give some attack speed, right? If you look at the stats of the items, they give some base attack speed. So it kind of works in the favor of like you're maximizing damage while also giving him a little bit of attack speed. I think those work more effectively than just something that's raw attack speed on him. You really want to just like do a bunch of damage, show up, and then just like eat units so that he gives you gold and gives you items. He's not going to be like a primary carry, but he's a good +1 to throw in just to like guarantee that you get some extra value and you can hopefully cap a little bit higher. Next is Viego. So Viego is, in my opinion, it's my opinion, and I don't read comments anymore, so I don't really care what you guys think. Well, I kind of read comments, but I just don't respond to them because I don't have enough time. But I think Viego is the most broken unit in the game. I think if you see a Viego, you should always play a Viego. I don't see any reason why there would be a different unit that's better than Viego to play on a board, especially if you have an empty spot. It's almost always play Viego, and a lot of the highest cap boards that cap really high are because they can play around Viego. Now, that might not always be the case. Obviously, this is as per the most recent patch. But Viego, really flexible items. He's a frontline melee AP user, which means that he's really good at being a frontline unit, which means you can put tank items on him. He's really good as a damage dealer because he does damage, so you can put AP damage items on him. You can put melee items on him because he wants to survive in the front line. He's a melee damage dealer. You basically could put anything on him, and it will probably be some level of effective. The main benefit of Viego is that he jumps into the largest clump, so often he's jumping the back line and then he starts casting multiple times. In doing that, he basically applies Shred to everybody, which works well if you're playing around AP comms. He can apply Techie to everybody because if you have 2 Techie in, which isn't too hard to fit in, there's a lot of like units that share multiple synergies that have Techie. Then he also makes them do less damage. So you make them take more damage, you make them do less damage, and you also summon a unit on your board because he makes a hologram of the highest cost enemy that he killed last round. So it's not even like the first enemy he killed, it's the highest cost enemy he killed. So he also gives you a unit on your board, like an extra frontline unit. And he wasn't nerfed last patch. Like, I don't know what to tell you guys. Like you gotta play Viego. Now, he's hitting backline units, similar to Aurora. holding Morello or holding anti-heal items is really good because you can apply it very effectively to the back line. So even if you don't have items particularly for the Viego, just putting anti-heal on him makes him a very efficient applier of that anti-heal. Additionally, if you want to have more Shredder Sunder, you can also apply a spark on him or something like that. If you're looking for him to be really effective and annoying in the backline, then Edge of Night also works really well, because with Edge of Night, he'll basically jump to the backline, he'll de-aggro with the Edge of Night, and then that will allow him to continue to cast on the enemy carry, especially if you have a really strong front line, which will just be like a menace, and you can absolutely just like rail people very easily. So if you can, Edge of Night also works really effectively on him. There's other combinations like Hodge JG, which is just like a crit melee AP style of build, but you have basically many options with the items. Often, like, even a Crown Guard is really good on him for the similar reason as Kabuko. It just gives him a lot of survivability and a lot of AP. So the more the merrier. If I'm talking about like best builds, I would just build them towards damage and survivability. I would do something like Crown Guard, Jewel Gauntlet, and then one other item, which usually is a utility item, just because it's really effective and it's hard to necessarily like build best items. But if you wanted to have more survivability, then like a Hodge, JG, Crown Guard is something that I would personally like, because the Crown Guard basically allows him to survive almost as long as like an Edge of Night, but it also gives him some AP. But like I said, very flexible. You can make a BT on him. You can make like even like some of the other items like QSS and stuff. You can also build him with just like raw tank items, right? Like if you just put a Warmogs on him and just make him hard to deal with, that's another thing that's really great. So always try and find a way to play Viego. Trust me, it will be better than most other things you can play, unless you really need a synergy. Like unless you really need a synergy to like cap out your board. Always find a way to play Viego, and trust me, it will help you out a lot in your ranked journeys. Finally, we have Zac. So, oh, sorry, one last thing about Viego. Oops, sorry guys. Viego with Exotech is actually really powerful. One secret tech or secret synergy is Exotech with this blue item. The blue item Exotech on Viego actually works really well, because the way the blue item works is it gives you a lot of tankiness, which is good for him because he's a frontline unit. But then basically, when he attacks with an ability, he marks everybody, and then he also heals for that. So this guy just goes infinite on the backline with this blue item. It's actually like, I don't know if it's secret tech, but it's just something to be aware of. If you see this blue item, this blue item is pretty much useless on everybody. It's like one of the worst Exotech items, but specifically on Viego, if you can manage to get Exotech on Viego, either through Garen or an emblem, it's actually really good. So just be aware of that, because that might be a sleeper pick, because a lot of time people roll their eyes when they see the Cyber Coil, because it's kind of shitty on the other units. Just be aware, it's really good on Viego. Finally, Zac. So with Zac, basically, when you roll in your shop, he gets these blobs, and these blobs basically help scale him up. Zac's really good if you find him early game. Something that's really important to note with Zac is that whether or not you're playing him on your board, what happens is as soon as you put him on the board, if you start rolling, his passive will be effective, right? You will have the 10% chance of the bloblet in your shops. So whether or not you're playing Zac, like even if you're unsure, if you see a Zac, you should always put it on your board while you're rolling. So like, let's say you're rolling, or you're just like, you're trying to find the rest of the units on your board. Maybe you're not playing Zac right now. Maybe Zac is like going to be pulled in with an Aurora. You want to play the Zac on your board so you can gather up the bloblets while you roll, and then you can bench him afterwards. He'll keep the bloblets in the future because it's like a permanent scaling thing. So that's always, that's always like a note. Just make sure to put the Zac on your board while you're rolling, and then take him off if you're not playing him on your board permanently. And if you play him on your board permanently, then as you roll, you'll just find the bloblets. It's fine. The thing about Zac is that the bloblets really matter. If he doesn't have enough bloblets, this unit does absolutely nothing. He can actually die mid-cast before he even gets the stun off. He just jumps in the air, and sometimes he just dies, and then he splits, and he doesn't do any of his stun. So he's actually really annoying, and he can seem really, really bad, especially if you don't have bloblets. So one of the most important things for him is similar to some of the other units that I was talking about where you really want them to cast. You really want this guy to cast. So something like a Protector's Vow, an item that gives him mana or starting mana, is going to be really powerful. Protector's Vow, one of his better items. If you can put it on him, because you're guaranteeing that he gets the cast off a little bit earlier, and then when he splits, he also gets the cast off ideally. Things like a Redemption for that reason are also pretty good. Let me just find it right here. right? Because these items are built with a tier, so they give you starting mana, which just means that your first cast is going to happen a little bit sooner, which means that you have less likely of a chance of you just dying outright. So try and get a tier item on him. If you're not putting a tier item on him, because he's scaling his HP infinitely and he has like really good HP scaling in terms of like the rest of his kit, you actually really like Warmogs on him a lot of the times. It helps him out quite a bit. Besides that, you can build him with Giga Tank items because he's basically just going to be a tank. And the longer he lives, the more he will do. He has a little bit of AP scaling, so you could technically put like a Crown Guard on him and it's alright. But typically, I would just build for more full tank items. When I say full tank items, I just mean armor, MR, and other stuff. Like a good combination, if you're trying to pick out one, would be something like Protector's Vow, Warmogs, and then like, you know, something to just give you efficient armor and MR, something like a Gargoyle maybe. If you don't want to build these, then you can build like a Dragon Claw and a Bramble Vest, and those can work out equally as well. Also, another tech, I'm going to make an Ornn artifact guide probably sometime next week. I'm still working on it. Those are the ones that usually take the longest, and it's really difficult to just make because you want to make sure everything's right and as detailed as possible. Horizon Focus is really good on him, obviously, because he jumps around, he stuns everybody, so this can actually kill units just by constantly chipping away their max health. But we'll talk about Ornn artifacts a little bit later because, like, you know, I'm not talking about all the Ornn artifacts. But anyways, that's me just talking about 5 costs. Hopefully you either learned something, or this was all refresher or review, or hopefully it just helped you to kind of understand what these units want and how you can kind of slot them in a little bit better. If possible, like I say always, you should always try and slot in the units if you have an empty spot on your board, because it is very powerful. It's often going to be better than some small low level synergies, and it's often going to put you in a really good spot. Thanks for watching. Hopefully it was somewhat helpful, and see ya. Bye bye.